Hey everybody, this is Drunk Werewolf, and we are going to be reacting to CNN talking about the dating crisis with men. This is kind of the sequel to the last video we had yesterday. So let's get into it. CNN says men are
Piece
lost.
at the Washington Post website for several days this week was not about our record heat. It wasn't about the president's NATO trip or the election. It was an article by my next guest, Christine Emba, called Men Are Lost. Here's a map out of the wilderness. While admitting that, yes, men still dominate business and politics and many other spheres of American life, Emba documents what she calls a widespread identity crisis. Among her supporting statistics, men now receive only about 74 bachelor's degrees for every 100 awarded to women. With women becoming increasingly selective, more single young men now live with their parents than a romantic partner. Men account for almost 3 of every 4 deaths of despair, either from suicide, alcohol abuse, or overdose.
Okay, let's look at this real quick. So, 74 bachelor degrees for every 100 for women. Well, that makes sense because women have affirmative action, so they can get into good positions easier. And the structure of school is more towards women than men. Men aren't as simple as like classroom. Usually they do better in things when they can work with their hands. So you add to the fact that not only is there affirmative action, which knocks men out of school, because women are thought of higher than men. And yes, you could be a black man or or like an Indian man or a native man, and you can get in because of affirmative action. But just as far as like just women in general, if it's a black man versus a black woman, the woman's gonna get it if most things are equal. So yes, more men live with their parents because it's very expensive out in the world. And what is their reason to get a job and be a functioning member of society? Not that I agree with it, but I understand why they would say that, because a lot of men are trying hard out here, breaking their back, working hard, and they can't find a mate because they don't have a college degree or stuff like that. Yes, more young men live with their parents than used to, but most young men don't live at home. And almost 3 out of 4 deaths of despair from suicide, alcohol. The suicide, I'd be interested the ages. Because if it's like below 40, if it's 40 and above, I would bet that a lot of those suicides came from right after divorce, losing everything. But they kind of try to muddy up the numbers. So let's continue.
The person who's owned this issue, both on this program and most other forms of media, is Professor G, Professor Scott Galloway, as Emba puts it before quoting him in the Washington Post piece on his podcast and in his newsletter. The author, entrepreneur, and professor at New York University's Stern School of Business has made a specialty of talking about the crisis of unattached, rudderless young men and helping them aspire to more.
Okay. And this is where I have a problem with Scott Galloway, the professor. He's acting like a cuck and a simp. And this is why society does this. They call men who are not attached, aren't married, or in a relationship or with a woman, and isn't necessarily going for a high-paying job to pay a bunch of taxes, like they're irresponsible young men and they need people to help them. No, for a lot of young men, what they know that they could work for a hard job and do a bunch of hours and get a bunch of taxes to women, but why would you? Women don't pay any attention to you. They don't want to be with you. So why would I work above what I need to live and save down the road if it's just going to get taken through me in taxes and given to single mothers who are irresponsible and didn't want you anyways? Like, what's the point? Because most people work anyways, and they'd rather just like stay at home and maybe work a part-time job to pay for their expenses and pay for like room and board to their parents or something. But the shaming language is ridiculous. I bet they'd never say this to a failure like a single mother.
Well, joining me now are Christine Emba, ideas columnist for The Washington Post. By the way, she wrote the recent book, Rethinking Sex, A Provocation, and Scott Galloway. His most recent book is Adrift, America in 100 Charts. Scott, when we first talked about this months ago here on CNN, you actually thanked me for my willingness to discuss such a, you said, controversial subject. So now I'm wondering whether Christine's coverage and the enormous reaction means that the nation is ready to have this dialogue.
No, because those two men caught heat about it when it released like 7 months ago today. Like, as of when I'm making this video. They caught heat for it because nobody wants to talk about these kind of things that are affecting men. And I'm sure she got heat too, although she has a little bit more of a coverage because she's a woman.
This is a masterclass in how powerful journalism is. There's a lot of us out there, and a lot of mothers, and a lot of young men themselves, and people such as yourself who have felt something and have been talking about it. And Richard Reeves really moved the ball forward with his landmark book of Boys and Men. But there's one article, this sort of tour de force, has inspired more dialogue and emails and real serious conversation than anything that I've been exposed to over the last year. So Christine and her good work speaks for itself. And let me just say, over the last couple of years, the conversation has gone from one that immediately inspires a gag reflex, where people sort of see compassion as a zero-sum game and feel that if you're advocating for men, somehow that's misogynistic or not recognizing the immense obstacles that non-whites and women still face, to something much more positive. And also, we're beginning to crowd out the terrible, quite frankly, unproductive voices that filled this void that was created because people felt the problem and were talking about it, but no one was addressing it. And then some terrible voices entered this void. And Christine's work, and I think other work, is starting to crowd out some of those thinly veiled misogynistic voices and have a more productive conversation. A long way of saying I agree with you, Michael, and Christine's done us all a real service.
Christine, what drew you?
Okay, here's my problem with this, is that they act like they made some, like, ingenious discovery. The Manosphere and the Redpill guys, like Better Bachelor, Undead Chronic, Sandman, like, so many others, Fresh and Fit, you know, and there's all sorts of older guys, too. And they all have been talking about this for the last like 5 to 10 years. But they just get put in the, oh, they're misogynistic. They don't know what they're talking about. They hate women. But then they repurpose it in a way more milquetoast way and just say, oh, we discovered something. It's not journalism. You basically were like, hey, I like that stuff in the Red Pill. I'm going to just repurpose it in a nicer way. Here you go. It's ridiculous.
To the subject matter and speak to the enormity of the reaction.
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for having me, and thank you, Scott, for your kind words. I'll speak to the enormity of the reaction first. I have been overwhelmed by how quickly the piece has taken off, and how many people it feels like people were sort of waiting for someone to finally say it so that they could begin to have the conversation that they had been worried about for months, for years. As Scott was saying, people are worried about their sons, their brothers, in some cases their husbands. I get a good amount of email, but I've never gotten this much email from a single piece.
She's wrong. It's not that people have been waiting for someone to say it. They've been waiting for the right person to say it. Like a liberal man or a black woman or just a woman. It's about who delivers the message, because men say this and no one cares.
Before. And, we run our comments section usually for 3 days. And the comments were shut down early because there were 10,500 comments on this one piece, which I cannot think of another article that's had that sort of response. So it really does feel like people are experiencing this in their lives. They're seeing their male friends and loved ones struggle, look for direction and not know where to find it. And, I'll say that I started thinking about this piece. Actually, you mentioned in my book, Rethinking Sex. That book was sort of an investigation of sexual and relationship culture after Me Too, trying to figure out whether sort of our changes in norms had worked for us, if they had delivered what they promised. And I talked to a lot of young women for that book, but I also spoke to young men too. And it was from them that I found the most curious and saddening response. So many of them just seemed totally confused. The sands had shifted beneath them, as Scott lays out frequently. The economy has shifted in a way that doesn't necessarily favor manual labor skills where men used to dominate. Women are succeeding more in college and elsewhere, which, to be clear, is a great thing. But young men didn't know what they were supposed to be doing or almost what they were for. Should I talk to women? Maybe I shouldn't talk to women anymore because that's seen as toxic somehow. So
Yeah, it's not like sand shifted beneath them. It's that the fact that women, I'm sure, are unhappy because they like attention and they have to rely on online attention to get attention most of the time, because most men don't want to go up to them. Because they're afraid. It's like a red flashing warning over your head when you look at a girl and you're like, she's hot. And she looks pretty feminine. Oh, I see the warning label above her head. And I'm going to stick away from that because I don't want any part of that. Because it is safer with Me Too and everything. And women realize now, and I've seen some people say that it was an L. Yeah, it was an L. Because now men are afraid to go up to you. And they will only do it in a space like the dating apps, but then men feel like they are, which is true, they're not, most men don't get any looks on the dating apps. But it's kind of the only way we date now, and men grow up in this, and they notice that women work, women have these things done by the government, and they have this false sense of they don't need a man. Because there's sperm banks and stuff, they just want a man, so they're not willing to do the required things you need to do to keep a man. Like having sex as a duty and that kind of thing. And men are like, well, you don't need me, so I'm not gonna deal with it and I'll just get out of the way. And women are not happy about that. It's just how it is.
Instead, they were just retreating. They were, staying in their rooms. They were, instead of trying to ask a real person out on a date, they were watching porn to feel like they were, getting their power back. They would begin to look up to these figures like, Andrew Tate, for instance, or Jordan Peterson. And they just didn't know what to do.
Yeah, because guys like, I put Undead Chronic in there. Like, if you look at guys like Andrew Tate, even Fresh and Fit, even though they're more PUA type of guys, Undead Chronic and other guys, they tell you can be a man and you don't have to take it lying down, and they say you have to build yourself up. And they actually give you critique and something to build on, which is what men crave. But society and women don't do that. They just said you're a toxic misogynist. Because society thinks most men are, even if they're not. And it would be better to just do your own thing, even if it's not high paying and it doesn't get you a mate. Because it's extremely dangerous to get a mate anyways.
Scott, part of this that you've addressed is the lack of sex, right? These guys are not having the type of relationships that young men of a different era would be having.
Look, we don't like to talk about it. We hear the word sex and our brain fires a bunch of different places. But think of, the whole shooting match, the whole reason we have an economy, the whole reason we're focused on creating a more prosperous, secure nation is such that we can all recognize what is the key to a rewarding life. And that is a series of deep, meaningful relationships. And core to that, or anchor to that, and I'm not saying you have to have this to be happy, is a productive, loving relationship with a partner. And you can look at the most unstable, violent societies in the world, and they all have one thing in common. They all have a disproportionate amount of young men who have no economic opportunity and also have no opportunity for relationships. And if we're going to have an honest conversation, we need to have an honest conversation. Sex and companionship are huge motivators and guardrails for young men.
Just males in general, they're huge guardrails and they help them. But here's the problem.
Put on a shirt.
Here's the problem. Okay, let's say that you do get these economic advantages. They're not taking away affirmative action anytime soon. At least I don't think they have. So women will continue to get in ahead of men, and even if you give them a boost in colleges and jobs, women are still going to be preferred. There's a lot of women in these high-paying jobs, which means there's less candidates. And this is why it doesn't work, because now, with women in jobs and making money and stuff, they want someone better than them. And their standards go up, and they look for like the 7-figure Chad now instead of the 6-figure 20 years ago. So now, and they have no concept of money and what's realistic. They're just getting more and more delusional. So, and the family court system is extremely unfair to men, so why would they try to get a woman who's been blown out, who had her fun with Chad in college and high school? So you can get someone almost at the end of her fertility rate, around like 30, with debt, and she's masculine because she's been at a high-paying job. And she doesn't know how to turn it off, because you can't really turn that off. No, that's not what men want. And why would you do all that hard work? Because it's to go into hoflation. Men work 20 times harder nowadays to get women 20 times worse. And then she can just divorce you at the end of the day. And that's why men aren't trying or getting married. There's no reason, because you're never going to get married. Because the government and the laws, and with how women are acting, are scaring men away from being with women. Besides pumping and dumping. And that's the only type of relationship we're having nowadays. For people who are still having sex and choosing to.
They blow dry their hair, they get their act together, they get a job. So the attributes, the peanut butter and chocolate of behaviors between masculinity and femininity make for a better world. And again, that's not to say the people along the middle of that continuum don't deserve the same respect and the same dignity. But most households prosper when there are risk-aggressive, rambunctious, more prone to action attributes of masculinity in concert with more thoughtful and more loving femininity. And when men aren't engaging in relationships with women, and women can't find men they find, quite frankly, sexually attractive, we're in trouble. The greatest innovation in history wasn't the computer chip, it wasn't the iPhone, it was the middle class. And the thing that gave birth to the middle class was 7 million men returning from war who were given jobs and money and low interest loans, and quite frankly, demonstrated the heroics and the economic security to be very attractive to a lot of women. And we had the baby boom and the inspiration and the formation of the greatest entity of good in the history of mankind, the American middle class. Sex, companionship are key. And 1 in 3 men under the age of 30 in the United States has not had sex in the last year. And quite frankly, that as an adult is when they become bad citizens. It's no one's obligation to service them, but we need more economically and more emotionally viable men such that we can have more household formation.
Yeah, here's the problem. Let's say they do that.
Christine?
Let's say we do that and they get higher paying jobs. Let's say higher than most of the women. And they get these very attractive men and they get their crap together. And I'm talking like making almost $100K a year as a job, not like $50K, $100K, which is extremely high in today's day and age. And let's say women's pay, they stayed where they're at. Do you think women will be happy with that? oh, there'd be such outrage. We need to make as much as the men. And then the same thing would happen. Then down the road, women will just get upset because they can't find attractive men. Because they can't understand they have this. They want to be equal, but they also want to be. They don't actually want to be equal. They just want the benefits from being equal. And now that they kind of got a little bit of equality, they're having a problem with it. It'll just end up the same as it is. They'll want equality. We'll give them equality of pay and everything, which there already is. And then the cycle will repeat itself. Because the hypergamy is out of control. And we are in a man-hating society. You can't fix it by... You have to improve women to the point where it gives men incentive. But society doesn't teach women that they have to be accountable for anything. So the society's just going to burn.
You wrote a book on this a year ago. Is he right?
I mean, I do think there's something to that. I think that one of the pushbacks that I've heard to this piece and to this conception of, men being lost, men needing more care, is the idea that there isn't anything specific, about men, that, we should all just be good people, that there isn't a particular sort of set of masculine attributes or something called manhood that men specifically should aspire to. And, so they say, well, why are we focusing on them? We should kind of focus on everyone. And I think it's a nice thing to think. And I do believe that everyone is equal. But we have to think about, what we see in real life, realistically. There are attributes to being embodied as a man that are different than those that you see being embodied as a female. And actually being a good person means paying attention to those attributes, cultivating them where they're necessary, and figuring out how to channel them into pro-social roles. And we can be clear and say that there are many models for how to be a good man. There's not one kind of good man, but to actually aspire to be a good man is a good thing. And I think one of the places where, sort of the progressive movement especially has sort of lost footing here is by constantly saying that masculinity is toxic, by constantly talking down to men and, sort of suggesting that men are trash or men are scum, which is not aspirational, makes them feel resentful, and eventually drives them to seek role models who, sympathize with them and give them a path forward. It might not be.
See, that's the problem. To get men to want to be masculine again all the time and do that kind of thing and do masculine things like protecting society and protecting women and wanting to have families and take that risk, they have to change the laws for marriage. And they need to get women to change back to being feminine, because the problems isn't just, oh, the laws are horrible. The laws are horrible, but they need to change the way women act, because women act like men with boobs nowadays. And sometimes even more aggressive than a lot of men. With just as much manipulation as women usually have. And that's the problem. And on top of all the man-hating, which she finally gets to, that's the important thing, is you can't have the conversation because society hates men. Everything's toxic.
A good path in the case of someone like Andrew Tate, but when it comes to looking for a model, if the choice is between nothing being offered or you're a bad person being offered and, hey, you're great, men are great, they're definitely going to choose the latter. And we're seeing this in polling, actually, especially in Gen Z, and we can see how this is going to become a political problem. Right now, fewer than 50% of Gen Z men say that feminism has been a good thing for America. So we're already seeing this resentment coming from lack of relationships, lack of support, lack of positive role models, and it is really going to redound down the line.
It's not because, well, part of it is a lack of role models, but the thing is, feminism created this monster, and no one wants to talk about it. Liberals and women don't want to agree to it and just want to call it misogyny. Oh my God, misogyny. You hate feminism. Yes, because there are statistics and data that backs this up, that the vote led to women being equal, which made them want higher quality mates, which broke down the middle class and the family structure, and the laws made it so more women could survive being single mothers. So there's more single mothers, and they incentivized men to get kicked out of the home, which made less strong men. And the cycle has been vicious, and we're about 2 to 3 generations into that cycle.
Christine, thank you for writing the piece. Scott, take 30 seconds and talk about solutions. Give me a note on which to end.
Let's hear this.
Red shirt young men, start them at 6 in kindergarten, they mature later. Their prefrontal cortex matures 12 to 24 months later. More vocational training, 50% of Germans have vocational certification, it's 5% in the United States. More freshman seats, such that we can have not only more non-whites, more women, but also more young in terms of the great opportunity our elite universities offer. More third spaces so people can meet. National service so people can meet other people from different economic backgrounds, different sexual orientations, and also different romantic partners. Also, men like you and me, Michael, getting involved in young men's lives. The single point of failure we can reverse engineer all of this to is when a young man no longer has a male role model. So in sum, and where I'd leave it, is if we want better men, we need to be better men and get more involved.
No, the answer is we need to get rid of the single mother epidemic. That's the answer. Because then the fathers can be in the home and can be role models. And you can't get around that fact because no one is as influential to a boy's life as his father. Even his stepfather isn't as influential as the father, even if the stepfather is there all the time and the father isn't. So you just can't get around that fact. In military conscription service, that's not going to do anything because men have no reason to want to sacrifice themselves for this country. I know more young men around my age, under 30, that would rather go to jail than fight for this country right now if there was a World War III. And that is a problem. And as far as you don't need to start men late, you need to incorporate more things with your hands when it comes to school. Yes, women don't do as good of a job in school, but vocational stuff, like he said, yes, incorporate it into school. They are taking it out of school, and people are struggling. And you need to stop making it where it's like a skin color thing, whether someone passes or not. Because if they can't pass a class, you don't keep passing them, because then they don't learn anything, and that's how we get stupider. So, I mean, Scott said a couple good things, but Professor Galloway still does not... I'm not saying I have the answers, or that any of us have the answers, but the solutions that he's offering are horrible solutions, except for the vocational. So I hope you liked this video. This is a Drunk Werewolf. Please like and subscribe. Trying to get to 50 subs so I can start live streaming. So I'll see you guys in the next one.